We're in the fourth week of our series called Your New Playlist, where we're really talking about just the playlist that you have going on in your mind. And can I ask you guys, how many of you have had something incredibly embarrassing happen to you in your lifetime? Okay? Yeah. Myself as well. I thought in order to tell my story, I would illustrate it for you because it just tells better that way. But some of you, if you've been here a while, you've heard me talk about my best friend growing up because all my good stories involve him. But I had a best friend named Kyle. And Kyle and I were in the same class growing up all the way since like preschool. So we knew each other since we were like 4. So we know how to like get under each other's skin, push each other's buttons. And, one day we're at school, and we're just, at our desks and, we're writing down our notes and doing stuff. And I get uncomfortable sitting in the same chair for like multiple hours a day at school. So I like sit like this. Sometimes I sit like this. And, you have like your feet resting up on the chair in front of you. And sometimes you get the knee bounce going. And it's just really annoying to the person in front. The person in front is going like, stop it, right? And stop it. And they're like Kyle was in the front seat, this particular story. And we're sitting there, we're trying to do our work, and I decided I was tired of sitting in class. So I'm back here and I'm like just like tapping on his seat ever so slightly. And you can feel that just vibrating up the whole entire chair. And so he's sitting here and he's going, quit it. And he's like trying to keep working, and I'm not wanting to work, so I'm still just tapping on his seat, pretending like my pen is a bug, barely touching the back of his neck, and he's sitting here trying to do his work. He's, stop it. I'm serious. He gets back to working, and I'm sitting here just doing my thing, Super annoying 14-year-old me. Let's see how long I can keep this up. And he turns around and tells me, this is the last time I warn you. Stop it. Or else. Gets back to work. And he was a person of many threats. Empty words, you might say. Not the scariest person. In fact, the more angry he got, the funnier it was most of the time. So I just sit there, tapping. And when you're sitting in the same seat for a long time, and depending on what you ate that day, sometimes you're trying to hold in some gas. Remember that. Because Kyle was sitting here working, and without even looking, he just goes and jams it into my leg. And I go, oh. Everybody in class turns around and looks, and I'm like, he stabbed me with his pencil. And I start turning beet red. I can feel myself starting to sweat under my shirt because, I just ripped the biggest fart I've let in my entire life because he stabbed me, and the pressure from my... And let me tell you, I still have a scar in this leg right here. Just one little dot from a lead pencil. Just right into my leg. Actually, I've got a hole in my jeans. You might be able to see it. I can show you afterwards. Maybe it's this leg. I don't remember which leg it is. You'd think I'd know because I look at it. I've looked at it since the 8th grade. It's on one of my legs. I'll show you afterwards. But he got me right there in the leg. And I can tell you, in that moment, I don't think I've ever been more horrified or embarrassed of myself. Because, when the classroom is quiet and everybody's getting stuff done, and then one person makes a loud noise, everybody's looking at that one person. And that one person was me. I think I blamed it on him. I was like, because I was behind him, I was like, but I think the look on my face was pretty evident that no, actually, it was me. And how many of you guys have ever been in a situation? Maybe you didn't rip one, maybe you did, but you've been in a situation where all eyes were on you, and you didn't know how to take it, right? You were embarrassed, right? Anybody? I want you to turn to the person next to you, tell them an embarrassing story about yourself. Go. Let's focus back up. There's moments in life where it feels like you're the center of attention, everyone's watching you, and you don't want them to. And it feels incredibly weird, awkward, and sometimes embarrassing. Sometimes it's comfortable to have everybody watch us, like if we're the lead in the musical and everyone's watching us, it's like you thriving in what you're good at, or when you hit the home run, or when you make the last, the buzzer shot, right? The last shot at the buzzer. Everybody's eyes on you is a good thing at that point because you're like, yeah, right. But when you're put under pressure, when you're put on the spot, when you're suddenly self-conscious of the fact that everybody's watching me right now and judging what I do, I better get it right. And, oh no, stop looking at me, right? Sometimes it makes our minds go blank and then our heart rate increases and then maybe we start to get a little red and maybe we start to sweat a little bit because we're getting anxious and stressful and everybody's watching me and stop watching me, right? We get in those phases. Sometimes people watching us is not the great. It can feel like, especially if you are in the spotlight, if you are in the play or in the musical or in the game, it feels like it can, like everybody who's not in it, it just turns to be the biggest critic, right? The watchers can feel like everyone's biggest critic. And there's all kinds of critics in our lives, right? There's good ones, there's bad ones, there's critics because, you know, we've got peers at school, we've got people who you know are going to judge us for the things that we do, but we've also got people like coaches who critique our grades. Or our teachers, we've got coaches, we've got parents, we've got people in our lives that critique us on a regular basis because that's their job and they're trying to make us better. And then we got critics that maybe are just there because they want everybody to know their opinion, right? There's movie critics that try to tell us what we should watch and what we shouldn't watch. There's food critics who decide what the next great restaurant is. In fact, I want you to be a food critic right now. Scale of 1 to 10, 10 being awesome, 1 being terrible. How good is the cafeteria food at your school? 1s and 2s? Got a 7, okay. 5? 10? You're homeschooled, so your mom's a good cook. Okay, 10. Okay. You said it's too high priced. Who said that? Okay. All right. Calzones are worth it is what I'm hearing. What was that? Okay, yeah.
The calzones are what hit me. Those things are 100% worth the price.
Okay. All right. So, but in general, some of you are giving very low ratings. Some of you are getting very high ratings. Why do we have such strong opinions about this, do you think? Because we have to eat it every day. Okay. Because you're really hungry? Yeah. Okay. See, we definitely all have strong opinions about the things that we consume every day. When you are different, when you're brave, when you're unique, or when you're bold, right? When you stand out from the crowd, whether it's because of a role that you're doing or because, you know, you have a different personality or whatever it is, when you stand out because you're different, there's going to be critics because people will notice, right? People are going to notice people who are different or people who are standing out. People notice that thing. And so you're going to have to take criticism with a grain of salt sometimes because when it's just a human thing to do, just like you feel about the cafeteria food. You consume it, you got an opinion about it, right? When we consume watching basketball, have anybody watched sports at all? Like I've gotten really into college basketball lately, and I've been watching it every night, it seems like. And yesterday there were a lot of good games on, so I was watching it almost all day while trying to get other things done, and sometimes successfully, sometimes not. But what I find is that the commentators have a critique of the refs, of the coaches, of the players, people in the stands. They'll boo or cheer based on what's going on. They've got an opinion, right? Me sitting on my chair, it's like, oh, you shouldn't have taken it that way. You should have gone the other way and found the open man, right? Everybody who's not in the game, everybody in the stands seems to be a critic of everybody who's in the game, right? Everyone in the stands seems to always feel like they get to be the critic for the people who are in the game. And honestly, that can be difficult for the players, right? It can be difficult when you're trying your best, but there's judgment, criticism, comments about your performance from everybody else. So what do we do when the critics feel loud and we don't know what to do with that? What should we do? How should we respond when it seems like the criticisms begin to get louder than everything else? Believe it or not, there was a time when Jesus actually did deal with a situation very similar to this. And Luke, who was not one of Jesus' disciples, but went around, did a lot of research, talked to all the eyewitnesses, and recorded the Gospel of Luke. That's the third book in your New Testament today. He wrote down this story that happened. See, Jesus was going back to his hometown, where he grew up. In other words, the people that everybody knew him, the people that he grew up playing euchre with on the weekends, right? Maybe they didn't have euchre, but they played together, they grew up together. If you've seen The Chosen, anybody watch The Chosen? This episode was actually depicted in season 3 last year. But Jesus comes home after he started his ministry, he started doing some of this stuff, and then he comes back home to Nazareth. And he starts seeing all his old buddies that he grew up with. He sees families. These are the people that know him from childhood. And so he gets there, and they start to meet in synagogue, which is where they had worship, is like church back then. And so he is asked to read from the prophet Isaiah. And so the scribe comes, they give Jesus the scroll, and like, Jesus, would you have the honor to read today's verse? And Jesus says, all right. So he takes the scroll, he unrolls it, and he reads from the book of Isaiah, and he says, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, for he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim that captives will be released, that the blind will see, that the oppressed will be set free, and that the time of the Lord's favor has come." So Jesus reads this passage from Isaiah, and then something crazy happens. Because this was written probably like 600 years before Jesus walked on the earth. And Jesus takes this scroll, he reads it, he reads these words. "The Lord has anointed me. The Spirit of the Lord is in me. And I have come to set the captives free." And then he says, this scripture that you've just heard has been fulfilled this very day. In other words, he's saying, what I just read, that the prophet Isaiah wrote down all those years ago, that's being fulfilled today through me. What he's saying is, I am the Son of God. I am God's anointed. His Spirit resides within me. And I tell you, the Lord's favor is this day, and it's going to be delivered through me. I'm the guy. Anybody seen Spy Kids 3? Where Elijah Wood comes out and he's like, I'm the guy, right? If you've not seen it, you're missing out on a key piece of my childhood, but that's okay. Probably doesn't hold up today. But, in fact, I know it doesn't, but it's okay. If that reference went over your head, it's fine. Jesus says, I'm the guy. And as you can imagine, just imagine with me, right? Imagine somebody you grew up with. Maybe that you haven't seen this year because you changed schools or something, but somebody that you know from elementary school. You grew up with them, you know who they are. Now imagine years later, they come back and they're like, hey, just want you to know, I'm the Son of God. And I'm going to deliver you. Right? You'd be like, I know you. No, that's not you, right? In fact, for Jesus to say this was the worst sin that anybody could commit. Unless what he was saying was true. But people assume it's not, because how often are you going to believe somebody when they tell you that they're God, right? You're not. So everybody looks at it. The sin that he would have been guilty of was blasphemy. And in fact, they all tried to kill him for saying this. And Jesus, somehow avoids the crowds and gets out of there. The Bible doesn't tell us exactly how. But they're thinking, wait a minute, you're that kid who just lived down the street. I know you since you were a baby. There's no way that you are who you're saying that you are. There's no way that passage from Isaiah is talking about you. Mark records it this way in his gospel. right? People said, isn't this the carpenter? Isn't this Mary's son and the brother of James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon? Aren't his sisters here with us? Right? These are people that knew Jesus and his family. They're like, what? Are you kidding me? And Jesus says that I'm the guy. This scripture is fulfilled through me. And so, can you imagine people's responses to that? I mean, today we don't usually up and kill people for their sins, right? But back then, this was a very serious offense. This was blasphemy. You don't say that. You don't claim to be God, because we'll prove that you're not by killing you if you say that, right? And they would have had every right under the law to kill him for that sin. Except for Jesus is God, and so it wasn't blasphemy and it wasn't a sin. But people in his hometown weren't ready for that. And so he slips away, he gets away, and he continues his ministry, and he doesn't come back. Can you imagine not being welcome back in your hometown? Can you imagine that? You're not welcome back because they'll literally kill you, right? Jesus knew what it was like to be firm in his convictions, to know what God had called him to do, and because he was different and obviously stood out for that, there were tons of critics in his life. Critics, to say it lightly. He knows what it's like to have people disagree with him. And there's times all throughout the Gospels where he's teaching and then crowds form and then the Pharisees pick up stones to kill him. Or people do not like what he has to say because they don't believe he has the authority to say it, or that what he's saying is they don't think it's right. Jesus knows. In fact, if you stand up for truth and you do what you believe is right in God's sight, people will not like it. You will step on toes. It will be offensive to people. And we have to be okay with that if we believe that we're living in the way that God has called us, which is a difficult task to do. Thankfully, obviously for Jesus, it's not how the story ends. He goes on to fulfill his mission. He ends up allowing them to kill him in Jerusalem. He dies on the cross for our sins because he allows it to happen so that he can be the ultimate sacrifice for us, so that we can be made right, because the wages of sin is death. Now, imagine if Jesus had listened to the critics, like, they're probably right. I'm probably crazy. I'm not the Son of God. And then he doesn't die for our sins, right? If he had listened to the critics, the people who opposed him, the story would have ended very differently. But because he stands true and firm in his convictions, the end of the story is written in a completely different way. Where is your story going if you listen to the critics in your life? Now, again, there's people who criticize you for good reason, because we're not perfect. We're not Jesus, right? So we have to have some humility. But like I said, if you stand out, if you're different, if you follow Jesus, which in today's world is different, and people don't like you because of your convictions, how is your story going to change if you listen to the critics? Versus if you stand firm in what you believe and what you know is true. Sometimes we have to be willing to take some bullets in order to live for Jesus. In other words, what we have to do is we have to learn to quiet the critic. When the playlist in your head is all the voices of the criticisms that other people have said of you, and not the truths that God has called you to, not the promises that he has spoken over your life, then we need to learn to quiet those critics and play new playlist in our mind. And that's, again, what this whole series is about. But we have to recognize the truth of this. There's a time to listen to those people who are older and wiser than you and that are God's voice in your life. But then there's also times where we have to quiet the critic and stand firm in what we know is true. You'll discuss that a little bit more in your groups and what maybe those differences are. But here's two things that you can do in order to start practicing this in your life. One, think about where the critics feel loud. Okay? Where are the critics loudest in your life? Where are you standing out the most where people are criticizing the way that you live? Okay? Do they valid points? Are they not valid? Do you need to quiet the critic in that regard? Think about that. Secondly, replace the playlist. Replace where people are it's just noise. You're repeating the critiques that people have said of you, and you need to just let that go or you won't move on. You can't move forward if you're focused on the past. So some of you need to quiet the critic, replace that playlist with something that God is calling you to, something true, something that you can move towards rather than get hung up on. Okay? Take a look what the Psalm says, for example, in Psalm 37:5. It says, commit everything you do to the Lord. Trust him and he will help you. So when you stand firm in your convictions, God promises he will be there with you. And people will sling arrows at you. People will come at you for following Jesus. But the Lord is with you, and do not be afraid. Quiet the critics and keep your eyes fixed on Jesus to continue to run the race, to run with perseverance, the race that is marked out for you, to do the good things that God has called you to do, despite what the critics say. God has a very unique and special purpose for each and every one of you in this room. And if you hold fast to that, rather than the criticisms that people lob your way, you will be in good shape. You have to have people around you who will help you, who will take the bullets with you, who will sometimes stand in front of you to take it so that you can continue to move forward. Sometimes you need to be the person that stands in front of the bullets for other people. You need each other. So as you go to your groups to finish this discussion, remember what God has called you to first and foremost. Fix your eyes on Jesus and stand up for each other. And you will be unstoppable.